Hello, and today I'm going to talk to you about the benefits and drawbacks of both direct sowing and module sowing. So here I've got some lettuce that I planted in modules. Sometimes these ones can be quite difficult to get out, but I'm going to plant this into this trough here, and then I'll talk to you about the benefits and the drawbacks of both module sowing and direct sowing. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is module trays and their benefits. So I've got some here which are from Containerwise, I believe, online, and these are quite good ones because they're really sturdy, so they'll last a lifetime. I think they're recycled plastics as well, which is also a benefit, because I know some of them can be quite flimsy. But the first benefit that I'm going to talk about is that they can help you get more full beds, and they can do this because they have a bit of a better germination rate normally, because you have nice good seed compost in there, and you have an exact number, an accurate number of how many seedlings you're going to have, which means you can plan accordingly, which means you can plan your garden to have full borders. And then what means then is you can succession sow, which is when you'll decide what interval you're going to sow these, and you can keep sowing a tray at a time, which means when you harvest one of them you keep planting new ones. This works well with annuals, so things such as lettuce do really well with this, and radish and beetroot and leeks or onions. And you can do this because you just plant them out at different intervals in the same space even, or in between the plantings, so when you harvest there's always plants there, which means there's no unused space. Whereas with the direct sowing you can't exactly do that very well. You can do rows in between each other, but if it's something with a big foliage you might smother out the smaller seedlings, which isn't very good, and also the germination rate wouldn't be as good. So if you can't tell already, I prefer module trays to direct sowing, and I was just going to talk about some of the modules you can get. Obviously you can get the one that I just showed you, which is a rigid one, but this one's made out of tree rubber. I prefer the rigid ones because these are quite difficult to plant the plants out because they flex and they grab onto the roots, whereas with those ones they slide out really easily. But this one is more eco-friendly because that's plastic. This is tree rubber, so it's from Sri Lankan tree rubber, and it's quite good. It's not that bad, but it's not my favourite one. And I also, one of the drawbacks of using module trays I was going to talk about here is drying out. As you can see, this is dried out. I watered it yesterday as well, and they do dry out quite quickly, some of them, and this hasn't even got plants in it yet. But that's why I'd opt for a bigger module for some plants, like the one I just showed you, because then it'll hold more moisture. But when the roots start twirling around in there, you should really be planting it out, so it shouldn't be drying out too much. And that means then that they get the soil, which means they get free roam of all the moisture and nutrients in the soil that they want. This is a closer look at the other one I was just speaking about, and it's got some bigger holes at the bottom, which means you've got to stuff the compost in really well to help keep the compost in from falling out through the holes, which is also a good thing, because when it comes to planting out you can fit your finger in there and you pop it out and the plant pops out and you can plant it straight in the ground. And this reduces, because this is so easy to get out, it reduces the transplant shock, whereas with the other one, the rubber one, some of the roots get ripped and things like that, and the plants don't really enjoy being transplanted. Whereas with this, it's really easy for me and the plants to settle into the ground afterwards. And another tip I've got is, when you're using one of these, I'd put them in a tray like this, because that also then stops the compost from coming out the holes at the bottom. And when it comes to planting out, you can just get your finger in and pull it out, and it's really easy. Another drawback of using modules I was going to speak about is that they use compost, and a lot of it if you're planting a lot of plants. So one of the ways that you can get around this is by making your own compost at home. And if you want, I'm going to link a playlist up here, which is of my series that I'm in the middle of at the moment, where I'm showing you how you can easily start making your own compost at home. And this series is for the complete beginner, which is really good for someone like you who wants to stop using shop-bought compost in your modules. And the one thing I'd recommend when you're using homemade is by sieving it with a soil sieve, because then you get a finer compost which is better for soil to seed contact. Unlike with direct sowing, with these you can start the plants a lot earlier than they're supposed to be started. So if you have a greenhouse, like behind me, or if you have a good windowsill, a nice sunny windowsill, you can start module trays of seeds off before they say on the packet that you should plant them out. And this means, like I have here, I had these sunflowers out before they should have been out, and they're doing quite well here. And that also means then you've always got a supply of plants there ready to go, which is better because it means you can have plants in the soil where you're going to plant it, and once you've harvested them you can have them to go straight out, which is a bit like the succession sowing I was talking about before. And you can also do this with flowers. I have been speaking about vegetables quite a bit, but with flowers it's good because once one plant's flowering, say an annual or biennial, what you can do is you can have a whole seed tray just ready to go straight out into the soil, which means when it comes to colour and full effect and structure in your flower garden, you can take the seedlings and put them straight out once something's finished flowering, and you've got a constant supply of structure, colour and interest in your garden. I'd just like to take a minute to make sure that you've gone down below, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so that you're notified next time I upload a video. When you're direct sowing, some of the benefits are that some plants really need this. So things such as root vegetables, so I like to plant my Swedes direct, and kohlrabi and pak choi, and even things like carrots and parsnips. These all need to be sown into where they're going to crop and to harvest. And this is because the roots can fork and move and go funny shapes if you put them in a module tray than in the ground. So that's why some root vegetables should be planted out. But most other things with finer roots are really good to be planted in module trays. Another thing is that it's much less accurate. And with module sowing you can have perfect plants exactly where you want them. But with direct sowing I don't think you'll ever get a completely straight row unless you're using a proper seeder like the Jang seed that a lot of market gardeners use. So that's why if you want straight rows in a neat garden, I recommend really highly using a module tray. So a good example of why module sowing is much better is these courgettes. And if I just direct sown these would be a sort of a month stunted, I'd say, or a few weeks stunted from where these ones are. And that's because I started these ones in a greenhouse about a month ago, and now I planted these out and they're ready to go and grow really big and fruit through the summer from an earlier date. And direct sown plants are also much more likely to get slug damage, and that's because they're out there in the elements, whereas in a greenhouse or a windowsill there's almost zero chance of having slugs. There's more chance in greenhouses than windowsills obviously, but in a windowsill you've got no chance of slug damage. But what I do recommend is if you are starting them in a greenhouse or a windowsill, to get the plants ready to be planted out, not only hardening them off, but you should rub your hand over them every now and then, which helps toughen them up to the wind, so you're imitating the wind so that they know what it's like, and they train their roots and their stems to be much stronger against the wind. Sowing into the ground is also much cheaper, as I mentioned with the compost and things before. It's much cheaper because all you need to buy is the seed, and you can just plant them straight into drills in the ground by hand. You can also use tools to make the drills, such as hoes and things, and if you want to know my top 5 tools, click up here. And depending on your soil type, sometimes it's not very good germination rate, and that's because this soil it could be clay and clumpy like this, and it might not be a good germination rate. But some soils prefer that, plants prefer that, so make sure you check first, because sometimes plants might do better in a clay soil rather than compost, or most of the time compost or a finer, more rich soil is a bit better for seeds. Another top tip that I've got for you is that when you're planting things like beetroots or salads, so like lettuce in the ground, sometimes the sparrows, which you can hear tweeting behind me, like to peck the leaves, and that's why I recommend getting something like this. It's just a wire grid really, and what I do with this is I put it over the top, and I can't remember, I think this is off some old shelves in a greenhouse or something, but these have got sides on so they keep them off the ground, and it stops the birds pecking the seeds out. And you can also, this would be good for peas, because birds and things like that like to get the seeds, especially wood pigeons as well. And this just has a little barrier to stop the birds being able to peck as much of your plants. I hope you learnt something from this video where I showcased module trays versus direct sowing in the ground. And if you did enjoy, please click on the end cards at the end. And to avoid the plastic problem, I've got here, up here will be the video I made about paper pots, and down here will be the video I made about cardboard seed trays. And if you want to subscribe, please click here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.